Comrades. You are listening to WHIV-LP New Orleans 102.3. This is Good Morning, Comrade. We have a very special guest today. We have our friend, our dear friend, who is a staffer over at the United Farm Workers. We're going to talk a little bit about farm workers' rights and maybe a little bit about our friend Gavin Haircut, too. We have Elizabeth Strater. How you doing, Elizabeth?
Hey, good, thanks. How are you doing tonight? Thanks for having me on.
Oh, I'm doing all right. It's we're recording on Friday night, so I'm feeling like a lot of relief after like a really kind of stressful couple of weeks. So I'm feeling pretty relaxed for the first time in some time,
That's good. Starting that weekend.
Yeah, it's the freaking weekend. Let's go. So how about you? What's going on?
Oh, not too much. Let's see. We had a pretty good, pretty rigorous week of like really long policy meetings. Not too much outside of that. Dealt with some state health and safety, health and safety folks, and just pretty much rolling into looking forward to the heat really turning up, and then we'll have a whole different kind of heat violations to chase down. So all in all, never a dull moment in the farmer movement.
Yeah, and you're coming to us live from Los Angeles or outside of Los Angeles?
Yeah, I'm based in Los Angeles. I'm based in Los Angeles, but it's a national organization. So, I end up, just kind of how these things work out, I end up spending a lot of time on issues that workers are having in the Pacific Northwest, in addition to, California. And then, of course, we got a pretty good team in California. The number of folks that look over the issues in the rest of the country are pretty slim. So, yeah. And you think about, you got maybe a couple million farm workers in the United States. Most of them aren't union members, but, regardless of whether union members or not, the UFW is going to advocate for all of those, 2 or 3 million folks. And we have a staff that is about the size of like a busy Applebee's, like an Olive Garden near the airport level of staff.
Fully staffed or like shorthanded?
Yeah, pretty. It's just really leanly staffed. It's a leanly staffed and leanly resourced organization. So, all hands on deck. So,
yeah, and United Farm Workers. I mean, if you want to just like sort of run down a little bit of who just tell us a little bit about UFW and maybe a little bit of the history there.
Yeah, sure. So for folks in California, and maybe to a point in Arizona as well, they're going to know, the United Farm Workers is the country's it's the first and oldest ongoing farm worker labor union. It was, founded back in the late 60s by a group of different farm worker organizing committees that sort of merged into a multi-ethnic, multiracial, diverse single organization, because they're getting tired of having the bosses play them against each other and break strikes, basically. Right now, the union membership has much declined from where it was. This is an organization that was co-founded, amongst other people, by some great names like Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. So in California, it's very much a part of living memory. And then for folks my age and older that remember the great boycotts, the lettuce boycotts, they're going to remember that. But sort of the younger generation, especially when you get outside of California, folks aren't necessarily aware. The reason it's remarkable to have a farm worker union, and the reason it's such an uphill battle to have a farm worker union, is that in most places in the United States, the farm workers don't have a protected right to form a union like other kinds of workers.
Right.
So when you think
they're
about,
not, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but like in the United States, we have what's called the National Labor Relations Act and the corresponding National Labor Relations Board, which essentially is a set of rules by which workers have that they can essentially organize, and some things that they can essentially like some resources or some norms that they can have where they would have legal protection when they act in concert with one another. And workers, and this is something that it's a little bit different for public sector workers like me, but these are two sectors that are not covered by NLRA.
Right. So, and the, what we really think about as labor law in this, in this country, the federal labor laws, the two basic, sort of behemoths of federal labor law. They were both passed in the late 1930s. So that's like Jim Crow era legislation, right?
Right.
The Fair Labor Standards Act and the National Labor Relations Act. And so the Fair Labor Standards Act, that's going to be your shit like, the Fair Labor Standards Act, that's going to be your stuff like minimum wage, child labor laws, overtime, all of this, sort of the central pillars of what we think about as labor rights in the United States. So the Fair Labor Standards Act, the National Labor Relations Act, which is, the one that gives them workers the protected right to collective action. I mean, everyone has the right to collective action. They just don't necessarily have the protection that they, can't get fired for
exactly.
it. So,
yeah, you have a lot of rights that you can't use.
There's a lot of stuff you can do. That doesn't mean, that you're going to have a protected right to do them. So,
right. You have a theoretical right to a lot of stuff.
Exactly. So these two basic labor laws are just this huge, upswing, related to really basic standards, that keep the kids out of the factories and stuff like that. So at the time and to this day, for a large part, there's a couple types of work that are excluded. So at the time, Southern congressmen on both sides of the aisle would not pass this law if it included agricultural or domestic help. So, house servants, or folks that worked in the fields. And, they really weren't, at the end of the day, it boils down to, like so many things in our country, it boils down to racism, right? So anything that they had sort of traditionally associated with slavery, they weren't going to allow those workers to have these protections. So I think
or just generally not white people.
Correct. Right. So those exclusions extend to this day. In most states, farm workers, for instance, have no right to paid overtime. In most states, farm workers don't have a protected right to collective action. But at the federal level, there is no, there's this massive exclusion from farm workers having some of the most basic rights that the rest of workers take for granted. And that stuff goes to stuff like child labor too. Child labor, it's pretty shocking to people that there's a lot of situations where it is legal to hire a 9-year-old to harvest your tobacco, but you can't sell it back to until they're 21. So, all of these really things that we take for granted as workers, as folks that are labor advocates, you start talking to farm workers and a lot of what you think goes out the window, including National Labor Relations Act, the NLRB, and the approach to forming a union is much different.
Yeah, I appreciate you setting that up because like the way that you sort of like laid that out was helpful in that it shows like different sets of workers that have different sets of rights essentially, or like different sets of ways of executing those rights or exercising them. And first off, I think of a couple of things. One, and we could maybe talk about these, discreetly, but one is that like when you have like workers with fewer rights, just generally, it seems like that's something that's rife for exploitation, abuse. I mean, whatever the word is that's appropriate. It's something that these people are sort of like over a barrel in a way that a lot of other workers are.
Oh yeah,
that are not rather, and they can sort of be pushed around in a lot more in
right.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
There's a whole confluence of of reasons that farm workers are more vulnerable, exceedingly vulnerable to labor abuse, to exploitation than many other workers. The work itself is it's really grueling, it's really low paid, it's exceedingly dangerous. For like, well, just talking about heat, a farm worker in the United States is 35 times more likely to be killed by heat than any other worker. Yeah. And for the majority of work, very few states have any heat protection standards for outdoor workers. California's one. We just won some really basic protections in Washington and Oregon. We're looking to strengthen those. But at the federal level, OSHA has just now, within the past couple of months, has entered into rulemaking for heat protections. But just think about that number as a level of the level of danger. That's just from heat. That's not talking about falls or amputations or decapitations or pesticide poisoning or any of these things. It's just heat. 35 times more likely. So this work is very difficult. It's very dangerous. No one is choosing to do it. It is by nature of those factors. It creates a workforce that is already a little bit desperate. They don't have a lot of other options. Back when those labor laws and those exclusions that we were talking about in the 30s, particularly in the South, that would have been primarily African-American workers. Now we're talking about mostly workers that are immigrants, mostly workers that are Hispanic, and the majority of workers, although the data is difficult to find because by nature it's an invisible workforce, but most of the workers are also undocumented immigrants. You also have, they're working in really deep social isolation. They're also working in geographic isolation. By nature, they're working in places that are remote. They're working in places that are rural, and they are far more likely to be migrant, moving around the country by the season. So they don't have that community base, that social safety net. They may not speak English. Some of them may not speak Spanish. They may speak a minority indigenous language, for example, and they're moving from place to place. All of these different ways in which they are extraordinarily unlikely to, first of all, have a firm grasp on what their rights are, because they vary from state to state and they're moving from state to state. But they also have, even if they know exactly what their rights are, they're going to be naturally reluctant to engage with a state or federal agency that probably isn't super popular in order to report the employer that is in control of their lives.
Right. Because there's no guarantees that.
What's that?
I'm sorry. There's no guarantees that if they do have some kind of like, even if they can go to, some kind of labor entity, even if that did exist, the fact that they're undocumented means that, oh wow, we hear that people on our staff are gonna, our undocumented staff are gonna be, calling in labor violations on us. Let's just do a couple of ICE raids at our own job place.
Yeah, and they do it. They do that.
People.
Employers do that. There's been some pretty big, widely publicized cases of that, particularly in the South, but where the employer realizes that there's some labor unrest and they will participate in a raid that will sweep up all of the workers in a cannery, all of the workers in a packing shed, and just clear out the facility. And because there is this ongoing economic desperation by some of these communities, they are able to offset those losses with a new group of workers that is now more afraid than the workers before them, and therefore less likely to hire, a lawyer, or less likely to call a hotline.
Yeah.
You had a guest on recently who talked about the Blooming Onion case, right?
Yeah, in Georgia.
Right. That was in Georgia. I was just sort of thinking about a case in Florida as well. So in just to quickly recap, that was a case where these are H-2A visa workers. So these are guest workers. If folks are older, they might remember the Bracero program. It's sort of the attempt at modernizing a similar type of program where workers basically have a visa. It's a non-immigrant visa, which means they're not on any kind of path to staying here, but they have a visa to come in and work for an agricultural employer for a fixed period of time in a seasonal job that they were not able to fill with American citizens, and then
temporary status, essentially.
Temporary status, but it is conditional to their employer, not just their employment, but their employer. Which means that these are folks, and there's all these safeguards created within the H-2A system theoretically, that they have to pay a certain wage. The wage is set by, it's called the adverse wage effect rate, which is not really to protect the H-2A workers. It's to protect the workers that are here in the United States. It makes sure that they pay them a high enough wage that it's not suppressing the wages of the workers that live and work here in the United States year round. So
I'm sure that's sufficient to make sure wages
it's
high enough.
Life of luxury for sure.
Yeah.
But so for these folks, they are not only are their existence in this country is dependent on their employer. Their hours at work are dependent on the employer. They are housed on private property owned or managed by their employer or the farm labor contractor. Their transportation here and their transportation home, their food, their access to drinking water, their access to a bathroom, and all of these things are completely dependent on the employer.
Yeah, basically their key to the entire world is through their boss. It's almost like they're their parent or something like that.
Oh, beyond their parent. So the situation in Georgia is particularly shocking because there was a massive investigation. There was a human trafficking investigation. We're talking about there was a bunch of federal indictments. Workers were being housed in squalor. They didn't have adequate access to food or drinking water. They were just things like they were forced. The wage theft is rampant, but this was unique. They were things like they were forced to harvest onions by hand at gunpoint. Workers were raped, and at least 2 of them died. Just you can't overstate how horrible it is. But what is really
at gunpoint?
At gunpoint. So, and this was in Georgia. Although these joint employers also have operations in Louisiana, Arkansas, North Carolina, but the Georgia Department of Labor has a program. The DOL there has a program that has farm worker advocates and folks that are there to investigate, tips or reports on labor abuse, to inspect the housing, make sure that they, are being housed in a way that's at least dignified for human habitation. It's not luxurious.
Right.
Things like
it sounds like they're social workers for children a little bit.
Right. So at least two of these federal indictments for this trafficking and slavery, forced labor, sexual abuse, everything that you can imagine that is like kind of horrific. At least 2 of those federal indictments are tied to people that were currently or formerly employed by the Georgia Department of Labor to be an advocate for farm workers. So when
that is about the most Georgia thing that I could possibly think of, by the way.
It's well, yeah. And there was a case in Florida that I was reading about that I actually reached out, and it turns out I actually had a contact with a couple of those workers. But there was a case in Florida where a woman who is pled guilty to racketeering, human trafficking, abusing farm workers that were here on an H-2A visa. While she pled guilty and was convicted, while she's awaiting sentencing, she asked to leave the district to work, and the prosecutor, nobody said no. What was that job? Supervising H-2A workers.
Oh my God, really?
Well, yes. And she was going to work for a guy who has also previously been convicted of exploiting H-2A workers. So the whole H-2A system, everything that we know about it, all of these guardrails that are intended, they're like a snake eating its own tail, right?
Yeah.
So for me, as an advocate, when we have H-2A workers that are that have issues, I can't call the wage and hour division that's local because I don't know them. And I don't know if they're going to be any good or not. And I don't know if that's actually going to make the problem worse for these workers. And so we'll get things like, you got to make sure that the guy at the store where they cash their checks. You got to make sure that you got a contact at the food truck. You got to try to talk to the guys who are driving the trucks that pick the produce up from the packing sheds. Like all of these sort of informal eyes on the ground.
Yeah.
Because,
that is wild.
You got to suss out the situation before you can even report human trafficking, because the guy that picks up the phone might be the guy trafficking them.
Yeah.
So where are you supposed to have faith in this institution, right?
Yeah. And I'm almost like thinking to myself, my brain sort of like goes into a lot of places with this, but like, what's to stop the boss from doing the same thing to try and snap up these same people that you're kind of like targeting as well? They can probably like have a company food truck or whatever, or a company, cash, check cashing.
Exactly.
Corner store or
whatever. Yeah.
But that's really scary when you think about it like that.
In a rural community, you're going to kind of have a sense of who's who, right?
Yeah.
But only if you have really good trusted contacts that are embedded in that community. So when folks call me in some areas, I have a real network of folks. When folks call, there's other areas where I don't have a real connection with folks, and you end up, sort of word of mouthing, saying like, hey, do you have people in this area? Like, I got to get someone to La Belle, Florida, and like lay eyes on the situation, because I'm not sure. You're looking at satellite maps. You're looking for like is there a Dollar General nearby? So, there's this sort of informal network of people that you can sort of word of mouth connect with. But but yeah, I mean, even myself as an advocate, it varies hugely. And when I'm thinking about Washington State, for example, labor and industries in Washington State is, I find them such a responsive agency, and that still doesn't mean I trust every single person on their staff statewide,
Right.
but like that's a truly responsive agency. I don't have someone like that to call in Florida. I don't have someone like that to call in Georgia. And I wish I did, but the reality is that these people have these enormous existential vulnerabilities. They have these enormous exclusions, these huge deficits in rights from people, like everybody else. And at the same time, yeah, how many doctors did I see today? I didn't see any, but I'll tell you, I ate 3 times.
Right.
So I know that essential worker is almost like a joke at this point. Infrastructure is almost like a joke. The supply chain, it's like all of these words have somehow lost their meaning because we've said them so many times. But it really doesn't get more essential than that. And as far as our food supply in the United States, more than 80% of it is domestic. We're not bringing food in from other places, not a significant amount of it. I mean, we're bringing food in from other places, but we're talking about specialty things. But those real basics, the vast majority of the food that we're eating came from within this country, and that system is deeply lacking in the level of intervention that the rest of workers would take for granted.
Right. Yeah. So, like, just to put it another way, the food that you eat every single day, listener, is being essentially. I mean, I guess technically it's not being harvested by slave labor, but it's like right up as close as you possibly can get to that line without it technically being that, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and clearly some of it is.
Yeah,
some of it literally is. So I don't think that's the majority. And I don't know how much you talk generally with your audience about fractured workplaces or subcontractors or ways that employers don't directly employ folks. So you think about McDonald's. It's very difficult to hold McDonald's responsible because the franchisees are technically the employer. Uber drivers, the gig economy, all these sorts of things, they're not reporting to them as a direct employee, and so there's this disconnect not only in communication but in accountability for the employer.
Right. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. I'll put it all together.
So when I talk about the employer, I'm using that word on purpose. That's the employer. That doesn't mean it's the grower, the person who owns the tree, the person who owns the earth. That's the grower. They might be the employer. They're probably not. They're probably using some level of a farm labor contractor who is recruiting the labor and managing and supervising the labor. And these growers may or may not have any ability to communicate directly with the workers because they don't speak the same language. And so I would like to say that, well, these guys, like, how are they supposed to, these people, these growers, how are they supposed to know if this is happening at their workplace? But, there's also some definite, like, I can't hear you, willful ignorance. And that level of transparency. So the employer might be the FLC. The FLC gets debarred from, using a labor program. FLC, Farm Labor Contractor.
Okay.
Or a recruiter. So the contractor or the recruiter, they've registered themselves, their sister-in-law, and like the guy down the road as an LLC, as a business. They get in trouble. They get debarred as an employer. That's fine. They'll just change it.
Yeah.
They'll just change the name. And make a new company. So
like
these growers ultimately are protected from the accountability. And I know a lot of people think about, the American farmer, an American farmer, salt of the earth, right? It's like a guy and he has like a dog and he like looks over his fields and there's like a red barn. Like it's like
the founding American myth almost.
Absolutely. It's like a man who goes out and like pets his wheat and gazes into the sunset. But, the reality is increasingly the grower is owned by a private equity firm. There's these mega, conglomerates. There's been this increasing amount of consolidation where, is Bill Gates a family farmer?
Yeah. He's a small business owner too.
Right. But that also makes it harder to hold them accountable.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that a small operation is any better or worse. I'm certainly not saying it's any better than a large operation. You know, in some cases, you think about certain labor laws, including child labor laws, vary state to state, like I said. But again, if you have very few employees, a lot of really basic labor laws don't apply to you. Even the ones that do apply to farms, they might not apply to you if it's a small enough operation. Whereas if you have 500 farm workers, you kind of got to run things better for the most part. So I'm not taking a position on family farming is good, mega farms are bad, but just I know there's a ton of ability to humanize the farmer. But in some cases, the farmer is like a private equity firm. So
right. I think that one thing that we can sort of take away from that, what you're putting forward there, is that there is a system in place that does not take into account. It does not take into account the people who are essentially harvesting all of the food that we eat in this country.
Yeah.
And all the food that we export as well, which is, I don't know how much that is, but it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, a lot of the stuff that we export is commodity crops and things like that. But at the end of the day, thinking about the way that the whole system is set up, the H2A system is coming in to fill the gaps that should be created by it being a terrible job. So, we've talked a lot about like a labor shortage, and the reality is that there's a shortage of employers that are willing to pay a living wage.
Correct.
And their inability to have enough staff to keep their businesses running is essentially the fair market force of forcing them to raise their wages, forcing them to provide a better job. But if you can, go online and order a few from Mexico, a few from Jamaica, and you're in total control of those people's lives, so they can't leave and quit.
Right.
They literally can't. Then, they're gaming the system.
You're able to depress wages by doing that. You're able to depress wages, and then at the same time, while you're doing that, you can complain about, we can't get Americans to do it because we pay so little, so we have to literally import people and put them in an absolutely appalling situation and an inhuman situation. And force them to do it at gunpoint in some situations.
Yeah. Well, and you get a little bit sometimes when you're really immersed in the stuff, you get a little bit desensitized. And there was a point in which I was having a conversation with someone who's not used to this. I'm really fun at parties, by the way. Not used to this conversation, and she said, "I just want to say that's the third time that you've said that. Fled their employer. They escaped their job and fled. That's so disturbing." And I'm like, that really is a way to think about it, isn't it?
You're right about that. It is very disturbing.
That's right up there with earn a living,
Yeah.
So these phrases that you get sort of numb to, but no, it is. It's like a hostage situation in some of these worst case scenarios. And in the best case scenario, it's still a boss that has way too much. That we have to think about the ways to disrupt those levels of power and control that these employers have. And I think it's a really comprehensive conversation to be had. It's one that the current administration is certainly more open to than the previous administration at the federal level, but still,
at least we're getting lip service and some policy as opposed to actively hostile policy or policy that benefits specifically these contractors or whatever that disempower workers in the name of generating more capital.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then sort of outside the H2A system, when you think about folks like you living in Arizona, in Florida, in California, to a point in Washington State, these are some of our agricultural mega powers in terms of state to state. And in California, farmers do have a system. It's called the Agricultural Labor Relations Board. So it's the ALRB as opposed to the NLRB. So back to that point where farm workers are excluded from these protected rights from union organizing, California is since the 1970s as a result of UFW's relentless organizing and boycotting and all these sorts of things, was able to pass a law in California in the 70s that created this agricultural labor relations board, where farm workers did have this protected right to concerted action, that they do have a board to appeal to, hold a union election, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. However, that law, the way that the farm workers vote has not evolved, which means, still we're talking about farm workers are going to vote in a union election. Their only choice to vote is at the work site where their boss is watching them. And it's literally under the eye of the boss, the supervisor, who's keeping track of who voted, which has
so inappropriate
a chilling effect, right? And one of my worker leaders was telling me it's like going to Trump Tower to vote for Biden. And I was like, that's a good way of putting it. I think it's worse than that, though.
No, it is.
Yeah. And so UFW for a couple of years, United Farm Workers, my employer, for a couple of years has been working on a bill to modernize some of those voting choices. Because, you think about the way that we vote in our regular elections, we have these different types of votings. I know those things are also under attack, but, you do have your options of your drop box, of your vote by mail, these various types, the early voting and all these sorts of things. But to make sure that people have a reasonable access to the democratic process. Mm-hmm. So in California, this bill, last year was called AB 616. This year it's AB 2183. And this is California specific, but looking to let farm workers have choices in the ways that they vote, like other people do when they engage in the democratic process, right? Mm-hmm. These same farm workers, they, we had a pretty high level of engagement for volunteers from our worker leaders to go out and do GOTV, knock on doors, do a bunch of canvassing to protect Gavin Newsom from the recall.
Oh boy, the haircut guy.
Gavin Haircut Newsom. And, farmers really turned out for Gavin Newsom, making sure everybody knew that they could vote at their drop box, they can vote by mail. Got to get that in. Yeah. We don't want the other guy, whatever.
I'm sure he returned the favor, right?
Oh, haha. So we passed the bill. We put this bill forward, the Agricultural Voting Choice Act. We passed the bill. Passes, with broad support through the California legislature. It's headed for the governor's desk. We don't hear anything. Try to have a meeting with them. We don't hear anything. Then we start marching, because that's one thing farm workers will do. They will march, and it was hot. And it is, we're talking like a 20-day across California in August, these really 600 miles got to be covered and stuff like that. These historic marches along the historic routes.
It's an insane amount of territory, by the way.
7 hours in to the march on the first day, with never calling us, the governor vetoed it.
I mean, there's no reasonable or acceptable excuse for this, but what was the thing that he put forward, I guess you could say? What's his sort of justification for this obvious betrayal, right?
So he said he had some concerns about the legislative language, that it was too vague or not protective or whatever. I mean, but it has been the champion of this bill, the author of this bill, very highly regarded. Someone who, it wasn't like amateurs wrote this bill, right?
Right.
And, what I say is what we did is we picked up the phone, got the shock of our lives, and then began to scramble and relocated the workers on a march towards Plump Jack Winery, which is owned and was founded by Gavin Newsom.
Oh.
So, as an internet cat said to a California newspaper, because these are the times we're living in, I think that
hey, that cat is getting written up in the Wall Street Journal.
That cat.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
I'm here for it because you can't. Nobody can avoid being shamed by a cat. The cat's gonna do what they're gonna do. But as the cat said, which I thought was a very good way of putting it, I think that he owns a vineyard that employs the workers that pick the grapes, that build the wealth, that pay for his haircuts. So, at the end of the day, the guy's a freaking boss.
Yeah.
And his money comes from the places that farm workers will never reach.
Mm-hmm.
He is supported by the elites. I know that California has this
California, right?
Oh yeah, like California is such a progressive place, but when you have this sense of safety in your blue state existence, what you end up having is a lot of mediocre Democrats who don't think they have to frickin' prove it.
Yeah.
And what they,
they're basically like riding on reputation, or not even reputation, but like perception.
Yeah. Yeah. And without any sort of viable challenger towards a Democratic governor, it's difficult to disrupt his power, and when you have these really safe blue states, sometimes it's really difficult to pass truly progressive legislation because you're going to stay in the safe zone.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about you, but when I think about, well, I should be careful, but there's a number of California Democrats that when I think about them, I'm not thinking about progressives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're thinking about people who are sort of like, okay, maybe I don't want to speak for you, but I'm thinking about people.
Tell me about people you're thinking about.
Yeah, exactly. I'm thinking about people who are beholden to the same people that like a lot of the conservative folks are beholden to in a financial sense, in an economic sense. They get their campaign contributions in their entire career, and even their own selves are a part of the elite class that creates these problems that we're discussing. Yeah. People like Dianne Feinstein, Nancy Pelosi, people who have essentially who are the elite. They just they call themselves Democrats, and they have like slightly better social politics in some situations where they're like, I'm thinking about Nancy Pelosi kneeling in the kente cloth, like right after the George Floyd protests in the streets, and then like essentially the Democratic Party after the last election, like deciding that actually like the reason that we lost was because of people saying defund the police or whatever, which is completely and utterly made up. But like those kinds of people are what I'm thinking about.
Democrats put energy into defending people like Cuellar in Texas against the threat of a progressive candidate like Jessica Cisneros, who, by the way, the United Farm Workers has endorsed.
Nice.
But thinking
she's in
about
Texas, I believe.
She's in Texas, right? Mm-hmm. And he's being investigated by the FBI. And that being said, it's very curious to think about all of the people that have endorsed him from the Democratic Party, these sort of mainstream folks. And we've spent, my opinions are my own, and I am not representing the opinions of my employer.
Sure.
But, you're thinking about the tremendous amount of campaign energy and resources that we're spending defending ourselves against people that would do a better job.
Right. Yeah. So like, it's almost like, if you remember, and this is going to get maybe a little bit away from where we're at, but I think about people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, right? Now, one of the cool things, and I say this, people are probably sick of me hearing this, right? I say this all the time. If I remember that actually our friend Diana, she's a huge supporter of the Coffee with Comrades Union up in Detroit, and Rashida Tlaib showed up literally in support of the workers up there. There was Teamsters that were on strike up in New York, and AOC was out there giving out food, and she's recently appeared with Amazon Labor Union folks. And there's also that like iconic image of of Ilhan Omar like driving the giant Teamsters truck. Like
Yes.
these people are literally on the side of workers. But like if you remember, at the beginning, like right after AOC had been elected, and like they had just the first bill that the Democrats passed was the voting rights one, right? And they completely and utterly like buried that story because the Democrats were so busy attacking Ilhan Omar for like what like right-wing people were saying was an anti-Semitic tweet, about Ilhan Omar, and they literally like censured her like at the exact same time they're trying to pass this voting rights bill. So like you look at like what's prioritized by them, and it's very, very like it's extremely frustrating, I guess you could say. And it makes me feel kind of black-pilled in terms of like electoral prospects, at least in the short term. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I mean, I think we all, whenever we start to feel black-pilled, we got to go down ballot. We got to get smaller and smaller and closer and closer. It doesn't have to be closer to your house. You might get really invested in a down ballot, election that's happening, in a state that you don't even live in. But we got to go down ballot, because where we are down ballot it's a prediction, right? So, I know there's there's this great meme, which is, I would say, caption this, and it's like a mushroom cloud that's covering half of the earth.
Yeah.
And it's saying, what would you do? And the meme is vote blue, no matter who. But exactly. And it does feel that way. But the reality is that I'm not saying vote blue no matter who. I'm just saying, like, don't give up on the process. Don't give up on the process. You got to think about who the people are that are close and nearby. And I mean, I can tell you well, actually, I can't tell you, but I'll promise you that there are in most states, there are folks at the county and city and state level, especially, who are never going to be the ones that are leading the rah, rah, rah in terms of a super progressive thing, because they're living in a purple or red county, but that are going to really show up, are going to really whip a vote, are going to really show up for someone like a farm worker. They're really going to show up for undocumented folks. They're really going to show up, for folks who are being forced at gunpoint to harvest onions with their bare hands. Yeah. But you can't say the same on the other side of the aisle. And that being said, let's make that, let's hold some of our own accountable and stop spending so much. I'm so sick of the Democratic Party spending so much of their resources defending the establishment from the progressives. Yeah.
I mean, and just to your point, the thing that I was going to say that I kind of like got so wound up I forgot to, that like, you got AOC and these folks showing up at picket lines. I live in Steve Scalise's district. If he showed up to a picket line, he'd be on the side of the cops.
Oh yeah,
I mean, that's straight up. I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah, so, like, he'd be like, I'm an unofficial Pinkerton for the day. Who may I whip with chains?
Yeah. Who do I point this gun at?
Yeah.
Where do I shoot the pepper spray in the tear gas?
Yeah, exactly. Man, I do a lot of work in endorsements, both for in a volunteer capacity.
Sure.
And not as a profession, but in a volunteer capacity. And one of my favorite question and answer moments is when I say, where are your other endorsements at? Do you have labor endorsements?
Yeah.
And then they'll answer, yeah, I got a cop union.
Oh, no.
And I'm like,
thank you for making this easy.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah.
I wouldn't brag about that. So that's a tough one. But like real workers. Yeah. Do you have any workers whose labor has, labor organization has endorsed you? But yeah. So it is funny. They're not always big newsmakers. It's interesting to talk to our mutual friend Diana. She works for.
We love Diana, don't we? Let's just talk about how much we love Diana.
Let's just talk about how much we love Diana. But she represents hospitality workers, which includes the cafeteria workers on Capitol Hill. And I mean, I want to know who the cafeteria workers say is their favorite. I want to know not only the ones that like show up to their picket or whatever, but I want to know the ones who are nice to them. I want to know the ones who treat them like a person. Because I feel like there might not be as much of a partisan split on that as there should be. Yeah. And let's see where their money and their mouth is, right? So
I hear you 100%. I mean, like there's I've certainly had some frustration, at least in my own experience with like internal democracy within my own union, and like not to say that things are like horrible or whatever, but that there are definitely ways that I think that members could be more engaged and more involved that are not taken advantage of, I guess you could say.
Yeah. I saw a post on, I'm getting a little off topic from farm workers, but I saw a post on Reddit the other night that was like, I was like a MAGA Trump guy. Like I have been deeply, deeply red conservative for my whole life. He's a working class guy. And, you know, the subreddit anti-work.
Oh yeah.
He's just like, if at the end of the day, once I took a step back, it seemed like I don't agree with half the shit Democrats do, if not 3/4 of it. But if I take a step back, their platforms and their policies all seem to be, how do we help people?
Right.
It's best for everyone. And the Republican platforms all seem to be, how do I do nothing for anyone except myself?
Yeah.
And, you know, how do we sort of, he's just like, I felt distressed from the guy, to be honest. And it must be hard. It must be hard to sort of like question everything you've ever known.
Yeah, and when it dawns on you, the best option that you have, at least when it comes to voting, is the Democrats. It's like, ugh.
Kind of. But I mean, I don't know where he lives or anything. Maybe he even said it, but he was a blue collar guy, and he was just like, the fact that the you know, conservative at this point is anti-union. Like, I just don't understand how they could think that they're the working class party and like paint the Democrats as these elites when they like are clearly trying to crush these unions, you know? And Starbucks getting targeted by the right for like being woke and like having a pronoun pin or not, their cups don't say Jesus Christmas or whatever.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, they might have a land acknowledgement, they might have a sign language interpreter. They're still union busting, right? They're just another boss.
Right.
So I think everyone's having this moment of this sort of this labor uprising, this working class uprising. I think everyone's having this moment of an existential crisis. And, you know, in some ways, I wonder if the chips are going to fall along the class lines differently than they are going to fall across the partisan lines.
Right.
You know,
I think that I can only hope that they do, I guess you could say, because like the alternative, if it falls along the partisan lines, is that we're going to get more of the same until it gets bad enough to the point where, you know, it's to the point where like we're really, really screwed. Like things will just get worse. It'll be more.
I mean, for me, I can't tell you how many times I've had the conversation along the lines of, but do you realize how many young Latino voters there are? And the other person will say, but they don't vote. And I will say, why should they?
Yeah.
What has been delivered to them that jumpstarts any kind of cycle of accountability? Who has been elected that answers to them and has delivered anything that they care about?
Yeah.
And you know, why should it hurts? It hurts to go out and knock on doors and try to convince people to vote for, you know, in a lot of cases, for folks that have not done anything for them.
Right. I mean, and I think another, like a part of, just since we're on this sort of point, like thinking about this, like Obama had this image when he came in, right? He had this image of being like, and it was completely undeserved, but it was like it's the image that he was going to be like the most progressive person that ever progressive, right? Yeah. And then he comes in and he does more of the same, maybe like, 1 degree on the, on the captain's wheel slightly, towards, something, but it's really kind of more of the same type stuff. Like, and that kind of disappointment that was kind of like put on young people who are now no longer young. I'm thinking about myself.
Yeah.
Like that level of disappointment. And I was never an Obama guy, really, to be totally clear. But like I've seen it in people, like they were like true believers that this is something that's gonna like actually be something that represents them. They get kicked in the teeth, and then like what they're not buying it again. They're not gonna buy the same BS over and over again. They're not stupid. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's also a disconnect sometimes in super progressive advocates that talk about, oh, DACA, great, like DACA. Like now this is a whole generation of people that are in limbo. I mean, I'm talking about myself to a point as well. You talk about some of the compromises that were talked about in bills that honestly ended up never passing in this current administration. But you talk to workers that are, you talk to folks that are the most directly impacted by what would it mean to you if you had legal status here, which meant that you could go home and visit your family for the first time in 20 years. To me, that doesn't sound like much. It's not a green card. Their legal status their legal status is dependent on their continuing to work in agriculture, which feels indentured and things like that. These are tough compromises. We're talking about this is a piece of legislation that passed the House but stalled in the Senate, the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. But our natural allies on the left are saying to us, like, how could you engage with this kind of thing for such a measly whatever? And the answer is because
it's better than nothing.
Workers are telling me,
yeah.
Do you know what it would mean to me to see my mom before she died?
Correct.
I have kids in Mexico that I haven't seen since they were babies, and they're 16 now. These are people that are telling me this would make a huge difference in my life. And these are the people that are the most affected. And so, yeah, there's going to be people on the left that are going to criticize some of these things. But like, okay, what do you have that you can deliver? Right. This is a piece of legislation that was supported by both Devin Nunes and AOC. I understand compromise. I understand being pragmatic. But at the end of the day, you can't expect people to get up and vote for someone that has not delivered, whether it's progressive or not. If they haven't delivered, why would they vote for you? And, you're thinking about these folks that have their parents are still undocumented. They still can't go and see their grandparents. They have crippling amounts of student debt. They're never going to rise above, a certain level. And like, why would they vote? Their parents can't vote. Why would they?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, and again, if people don't feel that it's going to change anything anyway, like, why bother investing your time into that when you can watch whatever's on TV or whatever? You can like scroll Reddit or Twitter or God forbid something worse. But people are choosing to do that too.
It is more entertaining, and Twitter and Reddit is more relatable.
Right, which is why, which is sort of like the theory that I kind of have of like why Trump was like the guy, he was so popular was because, well, he was he was the most television like person that was out there.
Right.
That's just the reality.
Yeah. And I mean, there was I would say, I mean, he didn't do well in the debates, but Trump, but there was one woman where he said, somebody's saying, babies in cages. And he answers correctly, who built the cages?
Yeah. I mean,
who built the cages?
Yeah. Again, there's the thing that we talked about earlier with, a lot of people who are Democrats doing the exact same thing as they claim that the Republicans are doing or whatever, but they're just sort of like trying to kind of hide their hand. And the difference is that there's a little bit of at least the Republicans are authentic in their barbarity and horribleness, I guess you could say. And there's some people can like at least respond positively to that genuineness, I suppose. Like, as horrible as that sounds.
As much as you want to defeat them all, the modern Republican Party, it's not enough to have someone to vote against.
Right.
We got to run folks that are good enough to vote for.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, How many votes can you vote against someone before you're just going to be like, give me someone worth voting for? Because it's just a race to see how bad Republicans can get. Because you're like, fine, whoever.
Yeah.
Just not that guy.
It's not Bernie,
like,
apparently.
Come on, we can do better than that, you know?
Yeah. I think we found the line with Bernie. He was like, nope, can't make that happen.
No.
Absolutely must. We absolutely must stop that at all costs.
Right? And that's where we're spending. That's where the Democratic Party is like, oh, you know who the real issue is? Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. I'm like, oh yeah, Elizabeth Warren is the problem. Sure. Yeah. Like,
she's too radical. She's too much of a radical Democrat when she was a Republican in the 80s or whatever. I mean, like, obviously, like, that's probably unfair shot or whatever, but like,
at least she had a plan. She had a plan. But at the end of the day, I think that there are people in this country that they weren't confident that people hated Trump more than they hate women.
Right. Right. And or at least that will like step up and do the defensive thing once again, you know.
Yeah.
People are just tired of doing that, and I don't know. I don't agree with not. I mean, I'm kind of like a serial, like I can't help myself. I go vote for dog catcher, you know, but like it's one of those things that it's like, no, this is really bad, and it's, you know, something you have to kind of deal with, you know. You have to suck it up and choke it down, you know, as much as it sucks.
Yeah. But anyway, here's to a few, as Dolores Huerta coined, si se puede. It is possible. Si se puede. Si se puede. It is possible. We can do it.
Yeah,
it can be done. And the more that people, I saw a photo of Dolores Huerta and Chris Smalls from the Amazon labor union.
Yeah, that was dope.
And I was just like, dang, we're talking about a massive generation gap for sure, but they're both people that were told that is a thing, that whatever you think you can do, that's impossible. Nobody could do that. And they both pounded on the table and said, yes, I can.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, like I was like skeptical of some of the stuff that ALU was doing at the time, filing at 30%, but like, and I guess we can close on this point, but like, as soon as they win, and as soon as they like literally organize a union at Amazon, no matter what you disagree with or whatever, like you got to defend them to the death. Like that is the most awesome thing.
It's
like,
just, it's
mega
so
props.
Awesome. Yeah.
And
but I'm not sure anyone can
sure
understand them better than Dolores Huerta and someone who did the impossible, that said, even the established labor movement that's impossible. Yeah. And they did it without external solidarity. They built their own solidarity, and they freaking won. So, so there they are.
Yeah, they earned it. Well, anyway, anything you want to say on the way out? Maybe we can have you back on next time. Maybe talk a little bit about Caesar and Dolores. And some UFW history, if that's your wheelhouse, really.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. I would say if there's a lot of consumers in this country that think that they know what kind of food is healthy for them based on their blood type, but they have no idea what it actually takes to get that food on your plate. If you want to find every single day on our social media accounts, you're going to see a farm worker. You're going to see what their job is. You're going to learn about stuff like how hot was it, or what piece rate are they paid because they're not earning minimum wage. But you're going to humanize that labor. That's going to be at UFW updates, either on Instagram or on Twitter. So we're also on Facebook, but Facebook. So at UFW updates, that's us on Twitter or Instagram. So if you want to learn a little bit more about the work behind your food, that's a place where you can go and find it.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Pleasure.
Really, really awesome to have you on.
Pleasure as always. Yep. Happy anytime.
Totally. And thank you for listening. This has been WHIV LP New Orleans 102.3. This is Good Morning Comrade. We love you. Goodbye.